But yeah, so you know, um, about the thing Justin said earlier about how switching from organized religion to sort of more individualistic spiritual world. You know, um, I get what you and him are saying, where it's like from one perspective, it's not progress because they're still believing something without evidence. But I'm trying, my whole argument is just I'm trying to take a more complete view where it's, you factor that in where it's like, okay, is the world a better place? Are people, only believing in things that they can, justify? But then if you also interpret it from, the idea, if you look at, how oppressive the, religious institutions of the modern day are and how they promote bigotry and they promote falsehoods like actively, not even just, oh, well, this is just what I believe and I want to believe it. They actively, you know, encourage people to go out and spread falsehoods, with like missionary trips and things like that. Then, I think it is really a step in the right direction to have people, you know, do soul searching and believe in something on an individualistic level instead of just believing in, whatever religion their parents grew up with or whatever religion's been pushed on them.
Right, and I think everybody agrees that the institution of religion is inherently a bad thing because of everything that comes with it. But also, in my opinion, if you have religion where now if people take their own personal experiences and they say that they saw something, whatever, then that's evidence for them, and I really can't argue against that. But when you have people that have religion and they are just believing a truth that has been pushed to them, whether it's out of a book, from their parents, whatever, if they have a religion and they're making the leap of logic to say that this thing is true, even though I don't have any of the credible evidence that leads up to it, then I find that to be a problem.
I think I mean, this is such a like a weird, like it is a problem, but like I'm not going to deny that it is still a problem to have people believing in, supernatural entities or, anything they really can't justify with observable evidence and repeatable evidence. That's still a problem. But my whole argument was just, it's still a form of progress because you're moving from a less dogmatic, or not, you're not moving away from, you're moving away from a more dogmatic and a more controlling and a more bigoted, you know, faith system. You're moving away from organized religion to something more individualistic and something that's more unstructured and more of just, well, I believe in there's a supernatural power, but I don't know anything about it. I just believe that there's a creator. I don't believe it's a specific God with specific beliefs. Like, that would be a better belief than believing in, the God of the Bible, the Torah, or the Quran.
Right, and we have some of that nowadays with, like you mentioned before, I think you said a lot of the spiritual non-believers. We also have a lot of that with a lot of the different pagan religions and a lot of the non-organized pagan, I don't even know what exactly you would call them, but do you know what I'm talking about? The people that have pagan religions, but there really isn't a
Yeah, they're
label
sort of
that has
like,
an umbrella over them.
yeah, they're not even spiritual in the sense that they believe in like a supernatural creator entity. It's more so that they just sort of worship like nature, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So we have that now, but even then, you have people like that really have the logical block where they don't believe even established science when it's presented to them, and you give them something and say, look, this is true and here is why, but they have already accepted a presupposition that tells them that it is not. That's why I
Yeah.
think it is such a problem, even if you remove the establishment of religion from the equation.
Yeah, I can see how that's definitely still an issue because, like, I think this is, I mean, this is just a sort of notion I have about the sort of more spiritualistic, community we have here in the United States. But they seem to be the people who are most prone to believe in things like anti-vax, which is, you know, plain just on its face absurd and anti-science. But again, it's still rife with problems. It's still not an ideal place to be in as a nation. But if everyone in this nation was, you know, if the same number of people were atheists and the same number of people were theists, but there was no organized religion and everyone was sort of this more individualistic spiritual type person, I think the US would overall be better because I think you would see a lot less in terms of like homophobia and those sorts of things. Anything that's sort of just been propagated by, organized religion. You'd see more people in support of gay marriage. You'd see more people who are, more tolerant of atheists because, there's still a lot of people in this country who don't want to associate with atheists just because they think, they're sinners or they're working for the devil and shit like that. Like I've literally had people tell me that I am a worshiper of the devil just because I'm, an agnostic atheist. And it's, just a plainly absurd, but, that's, some bullshit they've been fed by their religion.
Right. And in all of that, would you include people that call themselves Christians, but they don't subscribe to any of the organized denominations of it? But they say they follow the Bible and whatnot?
I wouldn't really include those people in it because even using the Bible as your sort of basis for faith is still, it has that level of organization to it where instead of going out and seeking a personal truth, they instead turn to a really old book and they're like, okay, I'm just going to believe whatever this says. Instead of believing whatever the old guy reading the old book says, they're just going to go straight to the old book. So it's the same problem, just with less middlemen.
Okay, so I guess my question would be, where would the spirituality come from? Because a lot of religion that we have nowadays comes from stuff like the old books or the establishments themselves. And the only way you get people to do exactly what I said before, answer currently unanswerable questions with just some answer they pulled out of thin air, which is inherently my problem to begin with. Where does all of that come from, if not the books or any of the already established religions?
Well, what I'm arguing is that, there are people who exist who, instead of trying to find some, universal truth or whatever people want to call it, some, something to believe in from an old book, they instead, they commune with nature or whatever bullshit they want to do, right? They introspect and they try and discover some, some sort of internal truth, either by sequestering themselves or just meditating or whatever. The whatever they do doesn't really matter. It really comes down to just a form of introspection instead of reading an old book.
Well, that I'm fine with.
Forming their own thoughts on.
That I'm fine with, but as soon as people start making that leap of logic where they have to answer a question that they do not have the answer for, that's where I have a problem with it. That's why I have such a problem with religion, both organized and otherwise. And that's why I kind of have a problem with the whole spiritual but non-religious thing too, because they still seem to be trying to answer questions that they do not have legitimate answers for.
Yeah, no, they 100% are. I just don't know how many times I can say this. Yes, it is still an issue for people who believe in some sort of spiritual thing they have no evidence for is still a problem, even if they're not part of an organized religion. I'm just saying it's a step in the right direction because now instead of just blindly accepting what they've been told from a book or from an old, some family member or some priest or, whatever minister of faith they adhere to, they're instead trying to form their own opinions. They're trying to introspect and get their own thoughts and feelings on it. Well, and I think that is a step in the right direction. Not only just because it's the organized religion and all the bigotry and shit that comes with it is taken out of the equation, but then also because people are now trying to, they're trying to actually process it in their mind. They're trying to think about it. And the more people think about it, the more you're going to move to a state of, wait, this doesn't make any sense. Like there's a higher chance that someone's going to be an agnostic or an atheist if they're actually thinking about it instead of, them being taken to church every day from the day they're two.
Yeah, and I guess people like me are outside of that because I was brought to church when I was younger, and then after that we just kind of fell out of it, and I don't know, just was thinking for myself largely. But what I guess what I'm trying to say is even removing the establishment of religion, you're not going to get rid of those problems. Like the bigotry, like you brought up. That doesn't inherently come out of organized religion.
No, but it is propagated by it in most cases. Like they specifically have passages in many of those base, these. I'm going to use a freaking buzzword here that I hate hearing people use, but I think this is appropriate. Regressive. These regressive ideas. Basically the opposite of socially progressive ideas. They are memorialized in these holy books because these were written 2,000 years ago when these were acceptable beliefs. And when people are reading those books, they're going to find those passages and they're going to use them to justify their bigotry. Whereas if these people are instead trying, if you don't have these organized religions to base those bigotries off of, it's a lot harder to justify them both internally and externally. And I think you're going to see not 100, it's not going to go down to 0%, but I think you would see less if there was no organized religion.
Well, that all came from somewhere. These organized religions were a lot smaller back in the day when they first sprouted up, and they had it written in before too. Take the very
Right.
early passages of the Bible; they have it all over the place, and that's only halfway through Genesis. And when that was all young, that mentality was still there. It's less the religion and more just the tribalistic mentality of humans.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if tribalism. I think tribalism plays a huge part in bigotry. You're 100% right about that. But I think it kind of depends. Like when it comes to religious people being bigoted against atheists or agnostics, like that is 100%. I think a tribal mentality, part of it. But when it comes to hating gay people, I don't necessarily know if that's even a tribal thing. I don't even know if that comes down to we hate them because they're different. I think that comes down to like that we hate them because they're, you know, like unnatural in a sense. Like I'm not saying that, but I think that was the mentality.
Nowadays, because we have religion, it's very hard to say. I think a lot of people do hate it. I don't even know that hate is the right word. That's just the word that a lot of them use. But I think the reason they hate it is because it's different. And you see that not only with gays, but you see that with a whole lot of different things. Atheists, for example, any idea that you can come up with that is different from what someone views as acceptable.
Right. I mean, it sort of depends on how you want to view tribalism, I guess, because there's one, sort of what I was initially thinking was, tribalism is when, you hate a group because that group threatens you or your group's existence. That sort of evolutionary inclination to hate another group because they're going to outcompete you in some way.
That would be the evolutionary inclination, but nowadays
or you could take the more general definition of you just hate anyone who's different because if they're different, they're not part of your group, and therefore you want to get rid of them because that ups your group's chances. They don't even have to necessarily be a threat.
Yeah, they don't necessarily have to be a threat. Nowadays, because we have all of these different social constructs that really have nothing to do with our inherent survival, we do have a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily tie back to evolutionary characteristics, but it's hard to take a religion out of the whole thing because it has been so pervasive in our history. So I don't really know where it's coming from and if there can be a tie that doesn't end up touching back to religion along the way.
I mean, almost nothing in human history isn't related to religion in some way. Like you said, it's got its fingers in everything. Um, I think there are some psychological studies from, the 20th century about um, basically, is it in-group bias, I think is the right term, where, the bias to prefer your own people who are similar to you and hate people who are dissimilar to you.
Yeah.
But those studies, I think, are pretty controversial now because of some things they imply about homophobia and other forms of bigotry. Um, Basically, I think the reason they're sort of uh, not popular now is because they sort of imply it's a necessity of basically evolutionary biology, or not a necessity, but a like necessary byproduct, a necessary result.
Yeah, I haven't
So
seen
yeah,
those studies myself. I'll have to take your word for it.
I mean, I'm just
But
remembering what I got. I'm just trying to remember what I learned in a 100 level psych class. My word is certainly not gospel.
nobody's word should be gospel. But I
Yeah.
think we're all on the same page there. But yeah, like I said earlier, I think both sides are right on it. We can all agree that removing organized religion is only going to result in good things down the road. I mean,
Yeah,
if you
I
ask us,
100% agree.
if you ask the people that are in charge of the organized religions, they would say otherwise. But
Everyone serves their own interests at the end of the day.
right. But I I still have a fundamental problem. I wouldn't even mention that it is progress. I would take the victory and say, "Yay. Okay, now on to this next step. We need to stop people from making these logical leaps." I
Right.
wouldn't
No,
even pause
just
long enough
because.
to say that it was progress.
Right. I made this comparison before where it was, I compared like people moving away from organized religion to individualistic spirituality as like the passing of the 13th Amendment. Like it's a step in the right direction and it's a huge step, but it is by no means where progress should end. And there's still a lot of work to be done since then, like with
Right.
the Civil Rights Act and the 14th and 15th Amendments. And,
Yeah, it's kind of like just one of the small victories along the road.
right. And I guess it's,
Because you could say that the 13th Amendment was like the major victory, but I would argue against that and say the civil rights movement was actually the biggest victory.
I mean, yeah, yeah, the ultimate victory is full equality, obviously.
Well, we haven't even
But
hit that yet.
well, right. I mean, then you get into the argument of equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, and what's the right balance to strike between them if you don't believe in in wholesale one or the other, and that's a whole other shit show.
Yeah, that would require a whole another conversation.
Right. But I guess my view is just any step towards the right direction is progress. That's just sort of my view, even if it's a small step.
Yeah,
One theist deconverted is progress.
yeah, I would agree. I'm kind of measuring things off of a different metric though, because I do see that organized religion is a problem in all of the things that they're doing. My main concern is individuals and the way that they perceive reality. And this can even get far away from religion into all the different conspiracy theories. There are people that are non-religious that believe in all of these different conspiracy theories. I have the same problem with them as I have with spirituality and religion.
Well, I mean, they're
because
essentially the same, taking beliefs that have no logical basis, no actual evidence, and then believing in them anyway.
right.
So they are comparable.
They're comparable, but what I'm looking at is people's ability to perceive reality. And when people are impeding their own ability to perceive reality, that is my biggest problem. And sure, getting rid of organized religion is a good thing, but I don't think that inherently gets people to the place where they are going to perceive reality any better. I think a lot of the people that subscribe to the organized religions, for the various reasons, like, I know what the facts are, but I choose to believe this, or I just need to know that there's something after death, all of those kind of people. I'm sure you've heard all those different responses before.
Yeah.
Those people are the ones that I'm worried about, and their lack of ability to perceive reality as it is.
Yeah, it's fundamentally, I think one of the biggest problems facing the human race is the fact that just people accept any old bullshit they see or hear, without evidence. And then, but, not everyone has, like, I think it's such a difficult issue because it has so many factors. But I think one of the biggest causes of that is access to education. So, because this is the other thing about moving away from organized religion, is that religion is a form of education, right? It's not educating you on what the facts are, but it's educating you on what the beliefs of that religion are. And when people, like, education is one of the most powerful tools for good and for evil. Because when you educate people, it sticks with them for a long time, right?
Right.
Whether it's bullshit or not. And so that's why moving away from organized religion, even if it's, they're believing mostly the same stuff in an individual capacity, you no longer have that educational factor. So it's not, they're not being programmed essentially to believe what they're believing. And then, the thing that goes hand in hand with that is, I guess, investing more in public education here and, in the United States, and trying to, you know, specifically address the issue of people are not thinking critically, and they're not, rationalizing, and they're not looking at things logically and evaluating evidence.